Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. There's much political news in the United States. The President of the United States traveling to Florida to CENTCOM and then to meet with military personnel, announcing yet again that his decision to go to war with the Islamic State, announced a week ago in Washington, does not include boots on the ground, does not include ground troops. The president has said this repeatedly over the last week. Perhaps it was necessary to restate because the leaders in Washington who are in charge of the military, that would be the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, were less than certain in testimony before the United States Congress, which has a hand in this, the Congress and the House of Representatives endorsing ISIS war in some fashion today to fund the Free Syrian Army. Well, in any event, the leaders in the DOD and the military believe that at some point, you can never tell, ground troops, that is, the military power of the Army and Marines and the rest of the war fighting, may be necessary to lead to victory in Iraq and Syria. The Syria component isn't filled in. I mention, because later on this evening I will speak with Monica Crowley of Fox News, that Monica and I review a time long ago in the 20th century when I was very young and many of you were not yet here to comment on the President of the United States. There was another president who believed a little and some bombing and a little could bring to ground the enemy of the United States. That was Vietnam. That was the gradualism, the incrementalism of the Johnson administration following the Kennedy decision to support our allies in South Vietnam. And I think you all know from your lessons and from your memory, it didn't work out well for the United States nor for the people of Vietnam. Gradualism, incrementalism, containing the military is not a plan that works, at least in the 20th century. Perhaps we'll begin anew with the powers of the robots to win without actually putting blood and treasure in the contest. I turn to Asia because there's a deal of blood and treasure there. It's hard to see with the Islamic State right now, and it's also hard to see with Petro Poroshenko, the president of Ukraine, to arrive in Washington within these next hours to plead, to reveal that his country is under great stress from the aggression of Moscow, of the Kremlin, during this new Cold War, that we have a situation in East Asia that is always potentially dynamic and troublesome. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com joins me tonight. We're going to go down that path of what's going wrong in Asia while the president is concentrating on what he's not going to do in the Middle East. Gordon is at WMAL, my affiliate in Washington. A very good evening to you, Gordon.
Good evening, John.
Yes, Asia looks like the quiet part of the planet right now, Gordon. Very quietly, it's going ahead with doing everything Xi Jinping wants. Is that right, Gordon? What Xi Jinping wants, he gets.
Well, that's what people would like to think, John, but there seems to be a little bit of resistance these days inside of the Communist Party to his grand plans.
Yes, resistance inside the Communist Party. Imagine that. Upset with the party apparatus. To help us tell this story, Arthur Waldron joins. Arthur of the University of Pennsylvania, Lauder Professor of International Relations. Arthur, there's a man named Zhou Yongkong. He is no longer a member of the Standing Committee, but once upon a time he was Yagoda. He was Yezov, he was the KGB, the FSB. He was everything wrapped up together for security. And I read that he's been deposed, he's been purged, but he has friends. Are those friends happy with the status quo? Good evening to you, Arthur.
Good evening, John. Well, the first thing I have to admit is that I don't, in fact, know any of his friends. But I suspect that having had precisely the position that you describe as the kind of grand overseer of this huge security empire in China, consisting of everything from, special police to special facilities of every kind, that is just looking after everything, that he will know lots of people, that many people, quite a number of people will have owed their rise to him, and that some will have owed disaster to him. But he is one of the most high-ranking people ever to come under fire, and furthermore, he is retired. And the custom in China right now is that retired members of the Standing Committee of the Politburo, which is the 7 guys around the table or whatever who figure out what happens in China, are basically exempt.
Gordon?
So, Arthur, do you think that there is resistance to Xi Jinping, or do you think that maybe we're just seeing a lot of noise without any real substance behind it?
Well, I think first I should say that based on conversations with ordinary Chinese, there is some support for what he's doing, because there's tremendous jealousy of the extravagant, opulent lifestyles of the sort of rich and political in China, which has been obtained by only one way, which is by stealing the money of the state. There's no other way of doing that. Within that group, though, and remember the Communist Party is something like 80 million people, of whom, several hundred thousand are really important, everything that they have, in a way, now seems to come under threat. They all have got lots of money. They've all got, basically, exemption from rules. There really aren't laws in China. They are like mafia bosses in their cities. Their children go around and extort local people and make vast amounts of money that way, and are never punished. And they're a very, very influential group, and they've got so much that they're not going to let go of it easily. And I think that they're quite capable of pulling together just to try to stop this. Xi himself described the situation as a stalemate in a speech a while ago, although today there was a newspaper article saying that the party was really much better organized and disciplined than that, and that Xi would get his way.
Arthur, I'm a cynical man, and I live in the West. If there's money in it, they'll do it. Is there money in this for Xi Jinping and the party?
Well, I don't know where all the money that they get from the people that they confiscated. I suppose that goes into the party coffers. I think the question that I would ask is, Xi's family, 300 people related to Xi, have been very, very thoroughly investigated over the past 12 months or so. And they've made a haul of $14.5 billion. And my question is, let's suppose we just started, with the first member of the Communist Party, and we went to the last, and we subjected each and every one of them to a similar investigation. How much money would we find? And I think what we would discover is that everybody, including Xi and his family, have got much more money than can be explained in any legal manner. So he's trying, what he's now trying to do, what Xi is trying to do, is to get rid of Zhou without going after him so much for corruption. But now the idea is that they want to investigate the death of his first wife, which occurred 14 years ago, and say that he's somehow guilty of murdering her. But they're very nervous about this, because obviously if a murder took place 14 years ago and nothing was done about it at the time, how come it suddenly becomes important? People say, well, he's just looking around for a stick to beat him with.
I like that, Gordon. Doesn't that remind of a recent murder investigation that brought down a rival of Xi Jinping?
Yeah, well, that certainly was...
And a protege of Zhou.
Yes, Bo Xilai. So we don't get them for corruption. We get them for dispute, family dispute. Homicide.
Well, the interesting thing is that the one paper says that the woman, his first wife, was killed by two army police cars driving from opposite directions to catch the car in between. The two drivers were given heavy sentences and then released and promoted. In which case, under Western law, there is no law in China. Zhou would be technically guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, but he would not actually have committed the murder. in most jurisdictions. So even if they go this route, first there's going to be a tremendous credibility problem. How come you just discovered this murder 14 years ago and no one's talking about it before? And two, what's your definition of, murder? And is there a statute of limitations and so forth and so on? So I think they're in a very difficult position. Really, they have to either reform the whole party and reconstitute it and change the system and put in checks, balances, and insist on disclosure and all this kind of stuff, or it's not going to be able to keep functioning.
Arthur Waldron, Lauder Professor of International Relations. A murder investigation. Now that is international politics. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com at WMAL. I'm John Batchelor.